as we try to understand this moment in our country's history. We have a problem in this country. We have an epidemic in this country, and we have to acknowledge that. The only way we get better is by acknowledging we have a problem with mental health, and we have a problem that people think violence is a legitimate option in voicing disagreement in our system.
This may look like another moment of grief on the Senate floor, but it's actually a referendum on whether America still believes its institutions exist to protect human dignity. What's really being tested here is whether our political system treats repeated tragedy as background noise, or as a constitutional crisis of public safety, trust, and leadership. This raises broader questions about what freedom means when people fear gathering in their most sacred spaces, and whether unity is possible without accountability. In this video, we'll break down how these remarks challenge the Senate, confront national complacency, and demand that power finally act like it carries responsibility, not just sympathy.
Senator from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, along with Senator Gary Peters, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate observe a moment of silence in this chamber to honor the 4 people and many more wounded yesterday in Grand Blanc Township.
Without objection.
Mr. President, today I rise on behalf of the community of Grand Blanc, a community in unspeakable pain, grief, and anger. I stand on the floor of the U.S. Senate as Michigan's junior senator, along with our senior senator, Gary Peters, to represent and honor what has gone on in our community. At 10:30 yesterday morning, a man drove a car into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Grand Blanc Township. The gunman set fire to the building and started shooting. At this time, 4 are deceased, more are injured and at the hospital. And in this small community, just 15 minutes from my own community, we are shocked to the core. In addition to mourning the dead, we pray for the injured. We pray for the community that will be living with the effects of this for months and years to come. And we thank the professionals who are taking care of those in shock today. Everywhere you go in Michigan, whether I was picking up a cup of coffee or picking up my dry cleaning, Michiganders are very raw. I think the most important thing first is to thank our first responders, but also use them as an example. The first officer was on the scene 30 seconds after the 911 call, and it took law enforcement 8 minutes to neutralize the shooter. 8 minutes. They did a masterful job addressing an incredibly complex act of violence.
What just happened is a reminder that even in catastrophe, the first institutions Americans encounter are not politicians. They are those who run toward danger. That matters because it proves coordination, readiness, and leadership are possible when urgency is real. And it leads to a bigger question. If bravery exists at the ground level, why does hesitation persist at the policy level?
And their efforts are what are keeping people afloat. I want to give special recognition to 2 officers, one from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, the other a Grand Blanc Township police officer who happened to be in the area close by and risked their lives to protect the innocent. They did not wait. They ran towards the danger without hesitation, and they are heroes today. I visited Grand Blanc Township this morning. We made a point to go, both Democratic and Republican elected leaders, local, state, and federal. What I saw in the community is confusion and deep pain that something like this could happen in this small place. It's a community where fender benders are much more common than any kind of violent crime. And there's a feeling of pain that such a senseless and useless act of violence happened in our community. I think it's important to learn that lesson from law enforcement. From everyone I talked to, whether it was local law enforcement, our state folks, our federal folks, they all said we just all joined in. We didn't think. They put their heads down and they started protecting people. That is the example I hope we can all learn as we try to understand this moment in our country's history. We have a problem in this country. We have an epidemic in this country, and we have to acknowledge that. The only way we get better is by acknowledging we have a problem. We have a problem with mental health, and we have a problem that people think violence is a legitimate option in voicing disagreement in our system. Whether it was the death of Charlie Kirk, state legislators in Minnesota, people worshiping.
What we see here is a member of the Senate refusing to sanitize reality. That matters because acknowledging a national crisis is the first step toward legislative obligation, not rhetorical sympathy. And it leads to a critical crossroads. Either Congress treats these events as random, or it confronts the systemic conditions allowing them to keep happening.
Grand blank, those who attack the President of the United States. It's normal to look for an ideology and a reason why they would perpetrate these kinds of attempts or these kinds of attacks. But I think more than anything, what I ask Michiganders and ask Americans to do is look not for the specific reason why, but understand that what is happening in our country, we are signaling that we are unwell. We are unwell. Whether it's in Nevada or Michigan, people are unwell. And we have to understand that it is our responsibility to address that. Now, in Michigan, we unfortunately have had 5 mass shootings in the past 4 years. Oxford High School, Michigan State University, the Splash Pad in Rochester Hills, another church in Wayne, Michigan, and now Grand Blanc Township is added to this sick fraternity of communities that have to endure this kind of violence. And I would dare say that myself, I experienced today, this is the 4th time I have personally dealt with one of these mass shootings, and I can see that it desensitizes you after all these times. You get used to it in a way that I just can't reconcile. It was important for us to come together, Democrats and Republicans, to put out the message that please take a breath, don't watch everything social media is putting forward. Learn from our law enforcement officials to be serious and judicious, and let us all be leaders in our own lives. Either you are working every day in your community to make things better, or you are working to split people apart. Now, this targeted violence was meant to terrorize us. It's meant to make us scared in our houses of worship, where people were just trying to pray on a Sunday morning. It is meant to terrorize us in our high schools, in our colleges, in our places of political discourse, on our university campuses. But what it does by making us afraid, it is infringing on our freedom. If people don't feel that they can go to their sanctuaries, the place where they and their children are supposed to be safe, that is infringing on our freedom. So I would say we must acknowledge as Americans that we have an illness. And the symptom is this extreme violence that is being perpetrated on our most innocent civilians. So I hope today, after a long month of violence across the country, that Democrats and Republicans, especially in this body, can rise above the petty political games and come together to get to work on this epidemic. It is our responsibility as leaders. It is our responsibility as the people look to us to lead. And I just encourage every American to rise above the anger and vitriol of this moment and instead focus on our communities and what we need to come together and heal. And with that,
what just happened reframes security as a constitutional value, not a partisan talking point. That matters because democracy cannot function when fear limits participation, worship, and community life. And it leads to this reality. Protecting public safety isn't only about preventing tragedy, it's about preserving freedom.
Mr. President, I yield to my senior senator, Gary Peters.
Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I, along with my Senate colleague from Michigan, Elissa Slotkin, are heartbroken and appalled to stand here today as we grieve yet another tragedy in our home state of Michigan. On Sunday, Grand Blanc Township experienced unimaginable violence when a gunman drove his car into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, fired gunshots at the members of the congregation, and then started a massive fire using gasoline that destroyed most of the church building. This was shocking, it was horrific, and it was a violent attack on a quiet and peaceful community. There are now families whose loved ones will never return their call, never hug them back, and never sit by their side as they practice their faith. I'm devastated to share the ages of these individuals that ranged from just 6 years old to 78 years old. I simply can't imagine the agony that their families are now experiencing. There are also 8 other victims who remain in critical condition in the hospital, with their families waiting anxiously by their side. My thoughts are with them as we hope and pray for their safe recovery. This was the kind of horror that you don't want to believe is even possible in our world, let alone in our own community. But unfortunately, this is not the first time that I've stood at this podium after senseless acts of violence devastated parents, siblings, children, friends, and neighbors in my state. That's why a part of me feels this terrible sadness today for the pain and loss that was inflicted upon Grand Blanc Township and the greater community. But I also feel just immense outrage, because there are no words to describe the pain and the devastation and confusion you experience at these moments. Pain for the senseless loss of life, devastation for the sense of fear that no matter how hard we work to heal, this despicable act has shattered this quiet community. And our utter confusion as to how someone could have the capacity to inflict this kind of evil. We know that our nation is plagued by an epidemic of gun violence. More than 100 Americans will die from gun violence each and every day in our country. We also know that there has been a rise in violent threats and deadly attacks targeting churches, synagogues, mosques, and other houses of worship in communities all across our country. We cannot allow these patterns of violence to continue. We cannot simply accept these attacks like it's another normal day. It is not. And despite what people may tell us, there's far more that unites us than divides us. Now more than ever, we need to come together and hold each other up. And once we have grieved, we must work together to find solutions that will prevent this kind of tragedy from devastating more communities. It's certainly past time to enact sensible gun reform and ensure that every American can practice their faith without fear for their lives. It is certainly past time to take the temperature down on our politics, a growing sickness that has undoubtedly contributed to the rise of polarization and hate-fueled violent attacks across our country. The bottom line is that the time to act is now. There is simply...
What we hear is not just sadness, but accountability. That matters because it rejects the normalization of tragedy and instead calls for systemic reform grounded in compassion, responsibility, and courage. And it leads to a defining test. Whether the Senate chooses to be a forum of speeches or a place where consequences guide action.
No other option. I want to once again share my deepest condolences for the families and loved ones of the victims of this absolutely horrific attack. My heart breaks for the entire community and everyone that has been impacted by this catastrophic event. I also want to thank the law enforcement and emergency personnel who responded immediately to this harrowing scene. In fact, 2 law enforcement officers engaged the shooter in less than a minute. And as a result, there is no question that countless lives were saved. Their profound bravery and heroism can never be forgotten, as well as a courageous community members who acted quickly to shield women, children, and the elderly from gunfire. And finally, I want to thank the numerous local, state, and federal agencies who have stepped in to support the victims and their loved ones and ensure a thorough investigation is carried out. Mr. President, Michiganders are tough. Michiganders are resilient. But most importantly, they're kind. And on Sunday, that kindness showed through as we saw so many people race to help in the aftermath of this appalling attack. As we remember the victims, and as we remember their loved ones and the community members who are still grieving, I hope those actions not only provide some form of comfort, but also show that heroism and kindness in the face of unspeakable tragedy is truly who we are as Americans.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Taken together, this Senate moment isn't simply about grief. It's about whether America still expects its institutions to protect the people they represent. It forces us to confront a core democratic truth. Freedom means nothing without safety. Unity means nothing without honesty. And leadership means nothing without action. If Congress chooses comfort over courage, the cycle continues. If it chooses accountability, the country has a chance to heal. The stakes are moral, constitutional, and deeply human, and they demand more than silence. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA.